It recently occurred to me that I've been in employment for nearly 20 years, which is crazy. So I wanted to go over the top 10 things I've learned whilst being employed. Now, my employment started when I was like 14 years old. I was working in a Chinese restaurant as a dish cleaner. I was initially meant to be a waiter. I did that for approximately 1 hour. It went horribly, so they sent me back to the kitchen to do the dishes instead. And it actually turned out that I was pretty good at cleaning dishes. So I stayed in that role for, I believe, about 2 years until I moved on to my next job. And now today I am a marketing manager in a charity, and I just want to go through the top 10 lessons that I've learned. They won't be conventional things like how to make money and things like that. It will be more kind of skills that I've learned and people management tools that I've learned to help me get to where I am today. So buckle in and let's do it. The first thing that comes to mind about being employed for such a long time is that you're not going to get along with everyone, which is absolutely fine. Like school, like in life, there'll be people that you just won't get along with, and you can't quite pinpoint the reason why, again, which is fine. It doesn't matter if you don't get along with everyone. Sometimes people will try deliberately to get on your nerves, try and boss you around. Sometimes people just don't blend well together, and that's fine. When you're part of a team, you act professionally and you just carry on with what you're doing. You make sure whatever you're doing, you do it to the best of your ability. And when you go home, you're at home and you're not worrying about the people at work. And as I said, like in school, you'll get along with some people and some people you won't. And in life, you've got some real characters you just can't quite get to know properly or get along with. And that's fine. It's human nature. You're not meant to get along with everyone. You're meant to have some kind of boundaries when it comes to people. But that's one thing I learned, especially in like the second or third job that I had. There was a lot of different characters there. Some people I thought I would get along with because I had similar interests to them. That was not the case. They just didn't like me for whatever reason. And I actually got along with people that were complete opposite. So back then I was into like rap music. I was into like TV series. I think Prison Break was like the biggest one at the time, I believe. And I got along with people that weren't into any of that stuff. So don't take it to heart. You'll get along with some people and some people you won't. But you move on, life goes on, you'll survive. The second thing I learned is that people will be threatened by you. And what I mean by this is when I was doing the majority of my part-time employment, I was also in university and on my way to university. So what will happen is people will make comments about, oh, look at you, you think you're better than everyone, etc., because you're trying to excel and do something different. Not once did I show off that I was going to university or that I'd finished and graduated, I did my master's, nothing like that. But people assume because you're educated and they're not, that you will automatically look down on them, which is never the case. I've never ever done that. I don't care if you're the CEO of a business or if you're like the cleaner within the business. I treat everybody the same, but unfortunately some people will be threatened by you. They'll be threatened by your intelligence. They'll be threatened by the strides that you've made in your life to better yourself, and they can't quite take the fact that you're moving upwards while they're in the same place. And again, some people don't care. Like they'll be happy for you that you're at university. They'll just let you do your thing. But other people will genuinely go out of their way to make you feel bad for wanting to better yourself. And this isn't just in work, this is in life. I talk about it all the time about how people are just jealous for no reason. And work can be a very kind of alienating place because you're spending X amount of hours with these people, sometimes in isolation. So if you work in a stock room and you're working with a negative person, then that person is all you're going to hear for 4 to 8 hours, depending on what your shift pattern is. So what I would say is don't take it personally. Just know that whatever you're doing it for yourself. You're doing the right thing, and that person has just got some issues that they need to figure out. The third thing I can think of is don't sweat the small stuff, especially when you've started work for the first time. You're learning still. It's all good. It doesn't matter if you're making mistakes, just learn from the mistakes and try not to repeat them. If you are repeating mistakes, then obviously that's things that you got to focus on. Maybe you need a bit more training on, but don't sweat the small stuff. Obviously, if this is a crucial task and you're not sure about it, or if something very, very important which could have massive repercussions of the business, of course seek advice before you do anything. But if it's something small, like one example I can think of is when I was working in retail, I put some of the clothing in the wrong department because they look similar to the ones that were there. That's what I mean by the small stuff. If someone says, nah, it's in the wrong place, go put it in the right place, that's fine. But I used to take that quite personally, only because I felt like people were trying to make me look a certain way, and that's not the case. They were trying to teach me. Some were trying to make me look a certain way and look silly and everything else, but others were genuinely there to teach me and to show me the right way. So don't sweat the small stuff, just learn from it. Try and seek guidance from someone that you respect in the place. Ask for their advice, ask for them to train you if that's the case, but never take it personally, man, especially if it's part-time work. Part-time work, you can find another job, don't worry about it. But full-time employment is a little bit different. You need to figure it out, but don't take it personally and don't sweat the small stuff. The next piece of advice I can give you is to don't always say yes. And what I mean by that is, if there's an extra shift coming up and your manager expects you to do that shift, even though it's not part of your normal routine, you don't have to say yes. Of course, if you want to make extra money, absolutely fine, say yes, make that money. But don't say yes out of fear. They can't just sack you because you didn't do any extra hours. I used to have that fear. Whenever they would call me, they would say to me, Asan, can you do extra hours? I would say yes, even though I was tired from having college all day, tired from, you know, whatever it was. I would always say yes, and my performance wasn't as good as it could be because I was tired. But out of fear, I said yes because I thought, oh, maybe they'll sack me, maybe this will happen. And unfortunately, there are some psychotic people out there that will hold it against you. And when I did actually say no, eventually the newer managers held it against me because they thought I wasn't performing and everything else. So you don't have to say yes. As I said, it's a part-time job. If you want to do the extra hours, by all means, but if you're not contractually obligated to do them, you don't have to do them. And if anyone tries to cause an issue, then that's where HR and people like that can come in. You can get involved and talk out the situation. But no one should be bullying you to do any extra hours, especially if it's middle managers and things like that. 9 times out of 10, they just trying to set authority when they don't really have any authority, and they take it out on the part-timers and the young newbies that have just started work. So you don't always have to say yes. And this goes on to my next point about managers aren't always right. Just because you have the title manager on your badge or after your name or whatever it is, it doesn't mean you're right. Everyone is still trying to figure things out. It doesn't matter how long you've been there. Sometimes, yes, you can know things like clockwork and do everything on autopilot, but it doesn't mean you know everything. Like, businesses change, they adapt, and those managers, if they're not adapting and changing with it, then they don't actually really know anything. They're just working to their old ways and routines, and autopilot doesn't always help. So managers don't always know everything. Reach out to some of your colleagues who are actually on the front line doing stuff. So one of the examples I can remember is there was a new manager that started. I assume because they're a manager, they're going to know X, Y, and Z. I went to them and they told me to do everything which was wrong. And I got in trouble for that because apparently I didn't follow the instructions. When the case was I actually followed the instructions of the new manager. What I should have done is I should have gone to one of my colleagues, one of the other part-timers, or someone else in the organization, and not assume that the manager knows best, because in this situation they didn't, and I got in trouble for that. So what I would say is, don't assume managers know everything. Go to other people in the organization, ask their advice. If there's something that needs to be done directly there and then try and find someone and ask their advice, ask their opinion. Is this right? Is this wrong? And if they don't know, then I guess a senior manager would have to get involved, because someone in the organization's got to know what's going on. Another thing I would say is be a sponge. And what I mean by be a sponge is that listen to everything, absorb everything, take everything in, especially when you're new to an organization. I'm not saying like be a weirdo and eavesdrop on people. What I mean is when there's conversations happening and you're privy to these conversations, then sit there and listen. You don't always have to speak. One of the things that really gets on my nerves is when people expect you to speak at every meeting, expect you to speak when you don't need to speak. The worst thing is actually speaking when you don't need to, because people just see you as someone that speaks for no reason, and sometimes respect can be lost. So what I would say is sit there attentively, take everything in, make sure you understand it. If there's something you don't understand, make notes and ask the person that's in that conversation to explain later on. If you aren't confident enough to interrupt the conversation, of course. If you are, then I guess at a natural point you can stop them and ask them, sorry, what do you mean about this? But don't be the person that speaks for no reason. And there's a lot of people that do that. I've met a lot of people that do that, and they make those that are quieter in meetings feel bad for not kind of interjecting and not being present in a meeting. Just because you're quiet doesn't mean you're not being present. It means that you have very good listening skills, you're taking things in, and you compress things, decompress later on and then feed back. So don't feel like you have to always speak in meetings, but just be a sponge. Take everything in, whatever you're learning, take it in, make notes if you have to. And that's one big piece of advice I can give you about learning about an organization, especially if it's a small one. If it's a startup, you're working with 4 or 5 people that run the organization. So sit with all of them, listen to what they're saying to you. Bigger organizations are a little bit harder to figure out, like the finances, the HR process, and all that other stuff. Not to say that you can't do it. It's a longer process, but make sure you are a sponge. Take everything in and listen attentively. Another piece of advice I can give you is to make sure you build on your communication skills. Again, this doesn't mean that you're speaking in every single meeting and every single conversation, but just whatever you're trying to communicate effectively. Now, for me, this was a big challenge in retail. I used to work in a shop. It's a very big kind of like clothing store. And for me, being a very quiet, introverted individual, being on the tills wasn't the best thing for me. Though it pushed me into the deep end and finally got me out of my shell when I started communicating better. For some people, that's not the cure. Like, you don't just push someone into the deep end straight away. They can sometimes drown and things get worse. But what I would say is, if you're looking for the challenge, ask your managers, ask people to be put in situations where you're able to improve your communication skills. Life is about communication. So for me, it was like dealing with customers. You know, I'd be the quiet. You'd have a script you read from. You know, how are you, sir? How's your day? Did you find everything you're looking for? So on and so forth. That was like the basic. That was like, I could manage that. But then like going into like kind of like the crux of a conversation was difficult for me. And that's where you kind of, especially in sales, I wasn't working in sales, but sales is where you need to have good communication skills. So what I would say is develop it. If you need to go on a course, if you need to watch a YouTube video on communication skills, then do that. Make sure you're developing your communication skills, because they will help you in the long run. Even if they're not going to help you right now, one day you will need to pull out the bag your communication skills, because you're trying to communicate effectively, because you want to sell a product, because you're trying to provide a service, you're trying to do something which requires you to get your point across. So communication is definitely the key. This is an idea I touched on previously, and again, don't worry about being quiet. If you're a quiet person, that's absolutely fine. It's your personality. Don't make anyone feel like you're being too quiet or you're not participating and all that other stuff. There's quiet CEOs, there's quiet managers that have absolutely killed their businesses, are doing extremely well, and they're not outgoing people, they're not extroverts. You know, they are still able to communicate effectively and not have to captivate a whole room to do it. They could do it via positive reinforcement. They could do it via their communication skills with their teams in smaller groups. So don't worry about being quiet. It's a thing, it's a trait. It doesn't matter. If you'd like to learn to be a more extroverted person, there's courses for that. There's YouTube content. There's content all over the internet to do that. Don't worry too much about being a quiet person. I would still consider myself, I guess I'm in the middle. I still love learning. So a lot of people that have worked for me in the past would say I'm a quiet person. That's because I'm listening to everything that's going on around me. It's not because I don't have anything to say half the times. I do. But when there's a situation where I know it's a learning experience and no one really needs to hear me in that meeting, I'm sitting there listening, I'm absorbing, I'm taking in, and then later on I'm communicating effectively. But yeah, I guess you could say I'm a quiet person, inverted commas, but then I'm not, because I'm able to communicate effectively afterwards whilst absorbing at the same time. So don't worry about being quiet. It's something that you can figure out over time. If you want to stay a quiet person, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to be an extrovert to succeed in life. Another piece of advice, and that's kind of leading on from the manager's idea of them not knowing everything, people don't know what they're talking about. Like, people will make you feel stupid, make you feel inferior, make you feel like you're doing something wrong, make you feel like you don't belong. And the truth is, no one really knows what they're doing. Like, I watched a podcast today and it's like people just trying to figure things out. You're failing fast. So the idea of failing fast is a very good concept because it allows you to do something, fail fast, and you move on quickly to the next thing. There's nothing worse than doing something for a whole year, being afraid to fail, and then realizing actually after a year I failed and I need to start something new now. You're better off trying something and failing in the first few weeks so you can then proceed to the next thing. So over that period of a year, you could try something technically 52 times if you're doing it every week rather than once a year. So you're doing it 52 times, failing, and then succeeding fast. And that's what I would encourage. So don't listen to people. If something doesn't quite feel right, then don't always take it at face value. Always do your own research. And last but not least, it is not your fault. You need to understand that if something goes wrong in an organization and you're part of that task team or you're part of that project management team, or it's your project and it's not gone quite right, there could be a lack of knowledge, and sometimes that's not your fault. It's something that your managers, your senior managers, your CEOs or whoever, HR, haven't trained you for, or it's something that you just need retraining on. It's not the end of the world. You just need to not take things so personally. One piece of advice I learned recently was to take things professionally, not personally. So when someone is giving you constructive criticism, you should take that professionally, because you know when it gets personal, people change the way they say things, how they use examples and things like that. So yes, there are people out there that are trying to kill your positivity, and that gets personal. But if someone's giving you professional advice, take it professionally. Don't try and make it more than what it is. Just take on the advice, but just know in the end, if there is a lack of knowledge, it's not your fault. Thank you so much for listening to me babble on about the 10 things I've learned in the last 20 years, I guess, of working. It was really something that I think would bring benefit to a lot of people. I think everyone's experiences are different when they start working. Everyone learns new things. Everyone has completely different outcomes when it comes to work. But I wanted to give you my take, my 2 cents on what I've been through the last 20 years, what I've learned, and hopefully you can implement some of the advice that I've given. If you found any value from this video, it would be amazing if you could hit the subscribe button, like and share with your family, friends, your colleagues, whoever you think would benefit from this video. And I will catch you on the next one. Peace and love. Take care.